Yep.
Not every company has the ability to say, "Hey, go be an expert in this." If your technical team is a technical team of like 1 or 2 people, you then have to become the expert in all things.
Where are your struggles,
Yep.
and what's hindering our people? Because as we know, to be a good leader, you need to clear the roadblocks for other people.
Do I wanna be on the news for the guy that killed the condor? Absolutely not. Why can I not
Throw
catch this
me
roofer?
a rope, I
Right?
am
You
drowning
know what
over
I mean?
here. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Pest. I'm your host, Jen Sweeney Ingram.
And I'm like, "Though,
Today, we are on episode 12. It's just a Mike and Jen episode. We got some questions about rodent control and unique challenges in rodent control, and then we kind of just went down a winding path. So please enjoy this episode on rodents. Since we're talking about the rodent rundown and doing this weekly thing, and now we're getting questions about rodents, I thought it would be perfect to sit down with you specifically, because you have such vast knowledge in areas where some companies, people don't have the kind of experiences that you in particular have had because of your
yep,
company's setup. So the questions that we received were like, again, so some of the unique challenges in rodent control around different venues, like the complicated ones. So, like zoos, like aircrafts, and in the news lately, cruise lines,
cruise ships,
places where
right?
you're going to get rodents. And I wanted to preface this talk by saying that rodents are tricky, yes, because of their behaviors, but rodents are tricky in the business sense because every company does it differently.
Yeah,
Every company is set up differently, and what you say yes to and what you say no to, and learning how to say no if you have that capability, as a salesperson or as a tech, where you go into an account and sometimes you're like, I think this is way over our heads and our
yeah.
capabilities. Um, or like for your company, for Terminex, Renticle Terminex, which is huge, I want to talk to you about, do you guys take everything and say yes to a lot of things? E Because as you know, a lot of companies, they'll say yes to a rodent job specifically, and then
Yep,
they realize they're in over their heads. So they already said yes, they start
yeah,
something, and
yep.
then maybe you get the call or another company gets the call, right?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of our setup is that we have a technical person kind of in every region.
Right.
And they support that region. So if you have something that's odd and one of our account executives goes out and takes a look at it, we have a really good collaboration between sales and service, which I think that sometimes, like I talk to some of the other folks in the industry, and it's not necessarily that. You know what I mean? There is a little bit of the we sell it, you figure it out kind of mentality with some of the
Yeah.
stuff. Which I mean,
Mhm.
well, we've always been kind of like get us involved early. So
Okay.
when we sell it, we make sure that we're selling it the right way. You know, we
Okay.
have very knowledgeable salespeople, but when you go into a zoo, right? There's very specific requirements about what you can and cannot do. And you made a great point about, rodents are hard to control to begin with, but now take rodent control and take away the fact that like can't use rodenticide. Depending on the enclosure, can't use snap traps. Depending on the
Right.
enclosure, can't use blue boards. You know what I mean?
And if
So
that's
how
your
do
bread
we
and butter and your technicians have been trained only on baits and traps
Yep,
and maybe glue boards, then they're left like, you know, and having the system set up where they feel comfortable to reach out to management and not just be like, "Oh, just try this," or "You got
yep,
it, you're on your own."
yep.
So I'm super excited to hear about how you guys tackle things like that. And first of all, your company is actually taking on these types of accounts, so outside of just residential, the run-of-the-mill stuff, because
Yeah.
it sounds like the company has been set up to succeed in those, particular industries.
And it's been one of the other things that they've kind of challenged us with in the technical and training department is not only do we support like a region, but go be an expert in this, right?
Okay.
So, for example, for a long time, I took care of our healthcare market segment. So
Yeah.
it was in and out of hospitals, every day dealing with the pest challenges there. And then I moved into taking care of like our airlines and our zoos. So totally different set of challenges there. But that was the challenge to our technical team is go out and be an expert in multifamily housing. So if there is a question
Wow.
somewhere outside of the region that you're supporting, I know I can call Mike if I have a question about this, or I can call Jay, or I mean whoever it is that I know that I have a person that really has gone kind of above and beyond learning that market segment to understand the challenges of it. And look, we're really lucky. You know what I mean? Like we're really lucky to be an organization of the size we are that we can afford to do that.
Yeah.
Not every company has the ability to say, "Hey, go be an expert in this." If your technical team is a technical team of like one or two people, you can't. You then have to become the expert in all things,
All
regardless
things,
of
right.
what they are. But I think, like I said, I think the biggest piece of being successful in any of these challenging things is getting people involved before the sale. You
Okay.
know, it's get involved early. Let's come up with a good plan. Let's meet everybody that we need to meet beforehand. Like you think about going to a zoo and what we're gonna do at a zoo. And most of the time you think, okay, cool, we're gonna meet with the head of facilities for the zoo. Right? The head of facilities, great person. His job is to sign the contract. Day in and day out, you're dealing with zookeepers and you're dealing with vets.
Right.
So if you need to know those people. I will tell you that most of the zookeepers I've dealt with in my life love their animals more than they love their kids. It's like, you know what I mean? Like they spend so much time
So
with
it's
those
kind of
animals, right?
mhm,
So protective. You know, same thing with the vets. The vets are always going to err on the side of caution with that stuff. So I think when you come to any of those market segments with a, "Hey, this is what I wanna do," they are most likely not gonna just go, "Okay, that sounds great." It's going to be a, like, "Hey, this is what I wanna do. This is why I wanna do it. This is my expected outcome, and this is what we're going to do if that doesn't work." You know,
mm,
so building that all up front versus what you just said, which is like you take on a job and go, "Okay, now we gotta figure it out."
now what? Right.
Uh, you're better off doing the legwork, in the beginning than afterwards. So,
So talk me to actually, can you give a background first of all on your pest experience in general, and then kind of get into the management style, how exactly they come to you and say, we want you to be an expert in this. What does that look like?
yeah, so, I mean, I've been in the industry for 24 years now, all with Red-killed termites, which is
Awesome.
crazy. I
It's
know
so
it's
fun,
nuts.
isn't it? Like,
I ran into,
what an adventure.
uh, a woman called Lisa that we started within a month of each other, and I hadn't seen her in years. I ran into her in one of our offices yesterday, we were talking, I'm like, "You were at my wedding, and now my kids are 21 and 18." Like, that's
Wow.
how long that you know what I mean, I've been in this. Started off as a technician, was in operations as an operations manager for a while, moved into sales for a short period of time, and then I was in the technical department for the last 10 years. So our technical departments are sort of the board certified entomologists, associate certified entomologists, the ones that are out in the field coming up with treatment plans, helping to develop our approved product list. The ones that you call when, hey, I can't figure this out. Can you come help me? Right.
Mhm.
Big part of that team. And then a little while, like a few months back, I moved into our training department to kind of overhaul our commercial training program. And the way that that always worked was, like I said, we were lucky in that we've had a technical person assigned to each one of our regions, and they're really embedded as part of that team. So they knew the regional directors and the branch managers and the operations managers, and the operations managers knew that, like, hey, if I have a problem, I can reach out to my TSM, and he can you know, did you do A, B, C, D, and E over the phone? If you
Okay.
didn't, go do these things first, right? And then if you did all these things and we're still having problems, cool. Let me come take a look at this. And sometimes that was regionally, and sometimes that was getting on an airplane to go to San Francisco if it was in that sort of market segment that you were really strong in. So we've had that flexibility to kind of come and go and make sure that we have the level of support that everybody needs. So I think a big piece of it is having that technical department embedded in that local operating team as well to be involved with the salespeople. So the sales folks aren't afraid to call and say, "Hey, Mike, I'm going to go bid on this third party audited pharmaceutical company. Can you come with me just to walk it and see if you see anything that I might miss?" And
Mhm.
we're part of that whole process from the beginning to the end. And I like to think that that teamwork aspect of it is kind of what allows us to be successful in that.
Cool. So Radical Terminix has multiple of these technical service managers around the country,
Yep,
but from the leadership, they're saying to these TSMs, "You go specialize in this, be an expert
yep,
at this."
yep,
How
yeah,
cool
so
is
you get
that?
oh, good.
Okay, and what
Yeah,
does that
so,
look
yeah, it's been fun, and it was a couple years ago they came to us and just basically said, "What do you need to do to become great at this?" You know what I
like?
mean? So and some of it was, going through certifications that were outside of the pest control business, right?
Right,
You know what I mean? So, when I was doing the healthcare stuff, there's a accrediting body, called ASH, and basically they oversee, like, construction in healthcare facilities.
yeah.
Um, you know, so I was like, "I need to go learn about that." So they were like, "Cool, go do what you have to do. Figure it out, take the
Amazing.
classes, get your ASH certification." So when I go and I speak to it, I can speak to specific, construction requirements in the healthcare market segment. So I think a lot of times it's going beyond just the bugs. You know what I mean? When
Yes.
you come into these challenging,
Would you say it's
uh
going beyond the pest, Mike?
oh my god, that's amazing. Look at that.
I
Do you
love
see
a good
that?
plug.
That taught you just boom. I
Thank
loved
you,
it.
thank
I
you.
loved it.
But
Didn't
yeah,
even
it
do it on
really is.
yeah.
Um, and so what I love about what you said is that so a lot of times too, we get so in our heads that when somebody asks us, "What do you need?" It's kinda like, if you're a person that just juggles everything, it's like, "I don't know, what do I need?" Like, "I think I'm fine, I'm struggling, but I'm used to struggle, so this is normal, right?" But
Yeah.
if you're in an organization where it's like, "No, like, I need you to sit down, really think about what you need. Where are your struggles,
Yep.
and what's hindering our people?" Because as we know, to be a good leader, you need to clear the roadblocks for other people. So if there's something that you don't know where you're getting calls about this, and you're struggling to answer or really solve issues and your emails are piling up, then that's awesome to so were you the one to look up the ASH program or did somebody in your organization know about it?
No, they were amazing. They were just like, "Go find it." You know what I mean? It wasn't
Cool.
necessarily somebody up above. They really wanted us to own a lot of this stuff, so it was like, "Go find it." And I think that that's one of the cool things, and it is one of the great things about UPMTC too, is we have such a, like, breadth and depth of knowledge in that group that,
Yeah,
like, it's you don't have to be, like, the end all be all on everything. Like,
right.
you can reach out and say, "Hey, I don't know this.
And
Can
you're
you
not
help?"
going to be, you know,
Yeah,
as we
it's
know,
impossible.
people with 40 plus years experience are still emailing in
Yep,
wondering what a bug is or how to
yep,
go about solving something. So,
yeah. I think as a technician, I think back to my days as a technician, the one thing that I wish I would have learned sooner as a technician was to ask for help.
yeah,
Because, you know, I was very much like, "I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna figure this out." And I would get frustrated because I couldn't figure it out, and whereas if I would have just been like, "Hey," you know, say you are my operations manager, "Jen, can you come take a look at this with me?" Probably could solve some problems
yeah.
quicker, but I think we get into this mentality where, this is my account, I have to fix it. And we don't always reach out as soon as we can, where best case scenario is, like, collaboration to solve problems is always going to be quicker than just trying to plow through on your own most of the time.
I was just talking to my mom yesterday and we were talking about my sister's in med school, and so we talked about how hard we were on ourselves as kids, just
Yep.
in high school and college and everything, not wanting to ask questions because you felt like you just needed to know everything already. And my
Yep.
mom, she said, if there's one thing I just wish I could have instilled in you girls, it was to have a 50-year-old woman's mentality at 20 because
Yeah.
you just don't care. You just ask questions. So if there's
Yeah.
one thing that I would love to teach my son and anyone that I'm mentoring, it's just ask the question.
Yeah.
Whatever pops in your head, just ask it or just if you're gonna try something, maybe collaborate with somebody else and just say, "Does this make sense or is this totally off the wall?" Because even though we might say, "Just try things and see what works," at some point, yeah, we wanna stay within label and we don't wanna go too far
Yeah.
off.
Right?
It's such a delicate balance, really. But you do need to
From an
mess up
organizational like,
when
from
you're
an
young.
organizational perspective too, we don't know what we don't know. So
Right.
if I promise you're not the only one that has that question.
Yeah.
And if you come to me and ask me that question, it gives me the opportunity to go, wait. maybe we need to do a better job of how we're teaching this, training this, disseminating this piece of information. Because if
Uh,
you don't know, and we thought we were doing a good job of it, we need to go back and look and say, okay, maybe we missed something somewhere.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
at the end of the day, the whole like kind of my whole thought process is I always want to take away the I didn't know. You know what I mean? I want you to know what you need to know. But if I'm not doing a good job, or we as an organization aren't doing a good job of disseminating that, then we got to go back and fix that so we can do a better job of that. But the only way that we find that out is when we find out that people don't know. So
yeah,
ask the questions early. Don't be embarrassed. You're not the only person in the room that has that same question. I um I was doing a presentation years ago for one of the state associations, and a guy we were talking about we were talking about exclusion for wildlife, and a guy at the end asked me what bat eggs look like. I was like, "Well," I'm like, bats don't lay eggs." I'm like, "They're mammals. They give birth to live young." And, he's like, "Oh," he's like, "I don't wanna ask it in the class because I didn't wanna be dumb." And there was a dude behind him that was walking past and kinda stopped listening. He's like, "I didn't know it either, man. Don't worry about it." You know what I mean? So
yeah.
it's like I said, you're very rarely the only person that has that question, you know?
I'm so glad
So,
you brought that up too, because when I started as a technician, I remember sitting in my first interview. Of course, I had a master's in entomology, which didn't mean jack, frankly, in the way that it needed to in pest control, because, I'd worked with fire ants for 2 years and I had
yep.
studied the basics. I knew the biology and the morphology and physiology, all that fun stuff. But when I sat down in that interview and they said, "Are you interested in being a rodent technician?" And I went, "Come again? We do rats here?"
What
I
exact
just
no,
didn't even think about it, because we
no.
deal with
I just
bugs
do
all the
ants. That's it. Just ants.
Yeah, like, I for some reason, it was like, "Oh, yeah, pest control, you guys do this." And then on top of that, not every company just stops there. Then you mentioned the bats, the wildlife division, which is like, you can go to school for how many years to learn just bugs, and
Yeah.
then you go to a company and or not a not all of us have that even that background, but then you gotta learn all this wildlife stuff. That's
Yep.
a lot of knowledge, it's a lot to know.
It is.
You can't possibly know everything.
No, no, and like I said, that's why it's important to lean on the folks in your organization, regardless how big it
Yeah.
is. Lean on the folks that do know those things. And if you don't have that person, then go out and be that person. Go the one that figures out and learns how to do those things. I didn't know diddly about construction practices. You know what I mean?
Right,
I didn't do a whole lot of termite work as a technician. I live in Cleveland. We have bands of like subterranean termites, but like it's not super prevalent here, so we didn't do a whole
right,
lot of liquid termite. So I never, outside of taking my termite exam, I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking at like housing construction, you know what I mean? And,
right.
monolithic slabs and, you know what I mean? Those things. So, then when I had a question, I reached out to the guy that knew, and I think that's important to, like I said, reach out, find that person. If you don't know who that person is, be that person and learn yourself so you can be the expert for your team.
Yeah, and you're not being a bother at all.
No,
I mean, eh
that's the great thing of like everybody that's in a technical role at a pest control company. One, I would say the majority of us love puzzles,
mhm.
and two, we love falling down a rabbit hole and
Yeah.
learning about crazy things, right? Like, I know we talked yesterday, and you're like, I'm gonna dig into some hantavirus stuff, you know, and so then you start going in and you start to think, I mean, like I said, the internet's a blessing and a curse, but you know, you can go in and you can sit down and you can start to learn about different strains of the hantavirus and which ones are transmissible from person to person. The majority of them are not, by the way. We're not dying from hantavirus anytime soon.
No,
But yeah, like I said, it's all about like it's never a bother because it's really the part of the job that I would say most of us enjoy the most.
exactly, and once you get to the technical role too, by that time, that person's probably been within the company for a while, and we ourselves are not afraid to say, "I don't know, but I'm excited
Yes.
to look into that for you," or find
Yep.
the person that knows that.
Yep. That's my
So,
favorite thing. I got a person. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
have you met so and so? Right? This is
Well,
the
and
person
it
that
goes
lives this
back
thing.
to, some companies, like the one that I just most recently worked for, um, really, when it came to rodent control, stuck to, baits and, some trapping, but really there was a niche, and they stuck to a niche market, which is
Yeah,
smart. But even at that size, kind of small mid-sized company, you need to decide, do we take on more of this? Do we get trained in these different avenues, or do we say now it's outside of our control? You'd be actually better off going with a bigger organization or somebody or a wildlife organization that does this day in and day out. So, that's what's so fascinating about rodent control is that, yeah, you can stick to those things, or you can say, do we open up an exclusion line and what does that
yeah,
look like? And then you mentioned, healthcare and being trained in ash. With the wildlife, it's like sky's the limit. Now you need to know a little bit about roofing, HVAC, plumbing, so many different things. And how cool would it be to get in some experts from those fields to teach you about where the heck these rodents are getting in from? That's one side that I wish I knew more about when I was a technician. And like kind of you said about termites and knowing about slabs and all and how
yeah,
houses are built, knowing the plumbing and exactly how that works. Because the first company that I worked for, I was a rodent technician. I did pest control, but I did a lot of rodent control where I was getting on those steep pitch roofs and, whether it was shingles, or composite tile, or it was actual, heavy Spanish tile,
yeah,
completely different. How to go about those, even not breaking tile, learning the intricacies of how to do it properly, how to not get hurt, which is a
yeah,
huge one.
yes,
um, it's like we did smoke tests to see, where the fault lines were, how they were getting in,
yeah,
but there was so much to learn, and I was just
yeah.
so blown away when some of those guys that have been in the field for years and years were like, "Oh, here it is. Here's how they're getting in." And I was like, "What the heck? How did you find that out?" You know?
That all goes back to, like, that one time that they found that, and then moving
Yeah.
forward, you're like, "Oh, wait, I remember this from this," but
Yeah.
to your point, there's levels to this game, you know what I
Oh,
mean? There are
God.
levels from your basic rodent control, rodenticide, snap trap stuff to what you just said about, especially for rats, like doing smoke tests to figure out, do we have a crack in some kind of pipe somewhere that's allowing entry into this building, And then even getting back to, the zoo stuff, like, total out of the box thinking. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so I can't look you know the off target rodenticide stuff and secondary exposures. Obviously, big topic of conversation, right? So think about a zoo. Am I going to use rodenticide in there? And then I've got a vet asking me, hey, so what is the risk of secondary poisoning if a rodent eats this? And then one of my birds of prey
Right.
then eats this mouse, right?
Sure.
So, do I wanna be on the news for the guy that killed the condor? Absolutely not. You know what I mean? So, like,
Right.
we're not gonna do that. We're gonna figure
Right.
out other ways to get control, and a lot of time I will say this, like, over the years, we have sort of fabricated a lot of control equipment for those environments, because, like, I even think back to, we were doing some work for an aviary and, had German cockroaches in a quarantine area where the birds were, but the
Right.
birds were insectivores. So then the concern was, okay, so if I bait these
Oh, God.
cockroaches, what
Mhm.
happens if, like, a bird eats this cockroach after?
Yeah.
So then it's 1,000 emails to your manufacturers, right? You know what I mean? To the technical team for the manufacturers, like, what does my risk profile look
Right.
like?
Have there even
And
been studies that they can really even say?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and you tend to have pretty low mammalian risk when you're using borate products. So that tends to a lot of times be the go-to in those for insect control in those spaces. The risk isn't zero, but it's low enough that it's acceptable.
Yeah.
Um, but no, sometimes you just have to like look around and go, okay, like let's figure out what can we do in these cases. And a lot of the times it goes back to what you just hit on. It's okay, we know they're going to be there, but how do we keep them out of this area? So it goes back to the exclusion work. It goes back to sanitation and structural issues, right?
Yeah.
So what do we need to do to, food, water, shelter? How do we take away one of those three things to make this area less hospitable to them versus an actual control? If you would say, I would say that the majority of the folks you meet at the zoo are understanding the fact that they are going to have some sort of pest activity there. You
Sure.
know, it's about exceeding thresholds.
Right.
So if we get to, this point, now we need to have some sort of corrective action. So I think that in a lot of those environments, it's more about what are we doing proactively to ensure that we limit the level of activity than reactively and control. So there's a lot of time spent, walking around looking at potential entry points, potential harborage areas. And then we started to look at, some of the other you know, uh, things that go beyond, trapping or rodenticides, looking at the birth control products and looking at the CO2 devices that a couple different manufacturers make for burrow treatments. We've even used the rodent dogs a couple
Have you?
times in some of
That's
those
cool.
scenarios. Yeah, in conjunction with, some of the CO2, the burrow flushing stuff, the carbon sorry, not CO2, the carbon monoxide ones
Okay.
to flush, and then you have the dogs that are there to, catch anything that bolts out of the bowl holes. So I think when you come into these harder accounts, like you have to go, okay, the baseline stuff that's probably in my chem room isn't gonna work. We have to figure out
Mhm.
what we can do. And it's a pretty collaborative effort because almost everything that you want to do, like I said, at a zoo is like, hey, um, I have to run this by 3 people to see if it's okay. Same thing when you're looking at airlines. It's not just the airlines, it's not just the individual airline. The FAA tells you what you can and cannot do on an
Mm,
airplane, right? Like you can't have a dead rodent in an airplane.
sure.
So, if something you can't rodenticide is not really an option because I don't know if you know this or not, but if you have a dead rodent in there, they have to tear that plane apart until they find the carcass.
Oh, sure.
So,
The circulated
yeah,
air, and I mean, with
yeah,
hunt fire, with us talking about all this
yeah.
and
So there is it's I heard this story through one of my customers, and this years and years ago, but, they call it the $1,000,000 rat, and there was an airline, could not catch a rat that was on a plane. So what they did is they took the plane up to 30,000 feet, they depressurized the cabin, right? So
wow.
you're basically your pilot's in there with oxygen, flying the plane within there,
Oh,
right?
no.
So then when they land, they have to tear the plane apart and find the carcass of this dead rat.
Wow.
So,
Hopefully, he was
that's
sitting
not
in first class just on one of the nice seats, just
right?
easy pickings. Probably not.
Running out. Yeah, and it's in a lot of those cases, if an airplane is sitting on the ground, it's not making money for that airline. So you don't oftentimes have the luxury of saying, "Oh, hey, I can put some devices down in this plane and let them sit for 5 days,
Yeah,
and we'll
not
come
an
back and see."
option.
No, not an option. Um, 24 hours is usually what you get to try to trap something, and then that plane's gotta go again, and then, you take
Wow.
advantage of the next time it sits somewhere, you try to trap again, so, we kinda really designed, trapping strategies using multiple different, devices, different kinds of snap traps, different kinds of glue boards, and when we're talking about putting, 100 plus devices on an airplane, which airplanes aren't I mean, they're big, but they're not, gigantic. And then, mapping that stuff out so we don't forget anything when we come the next morning to clean it up. So, it's an undertaking, but like I said, with those limited windows, you have limited windows and you have limited treatment options.
Yeah.
It makes the whole rodent control thing so much harder.
It feels like such high stakes, and that could either terrify somebody or give them a lot of energy to, like, "I'm
Yeah.
gonna get this thing, by gosh."
Yes.
And I wonder
We
too if it's better to, be if those jobs are left typically to the bigger companies, if there's more liability like that. I wonder if you need to sign a bunch of things before you go into an operation like that. I imagine if it's a smaller company, they've got to kinda niche into that one area, and it's something I haven't heard of before.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of the times when you're dealing with like those larger places, they want somebody that can service an airplane in San Francisco and one in Orlando, and you know what I mean? So you're looking at like a
Yeah.
larger footprint for that
Mhm.
stuff. Um, just working at the airport in general is I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of working at an airport, but like
Haven't.
driving on the tarmac in an airport
Oh
in and
god.
of itself is mildly terrifying. You're
Right, yeah.
constantly thinking, like, "Don't pull out in front of a plane."
Yeah.
But yeah, and every airport's a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Somebody's
Some of
ferociously waving you, "Go that
it's
way, dummy,
that
that
way, right?
way."
We had a technician. This was a long, long time ago. He doesn't work with us anymore. But he called me and he's like, "Mike, I'm at the airport. I have 5 black SUVs surrounding my truck, I don't know
Gosh.
what's gonna happen, but I'm just calling to let you know." So then I don't hear anything for, like, 2 hours, you know? I can't get a hold of the guy, right? So what happened is and they went back and reviewed all the security footage, but he was driving on the tarmac, and there was a pilot that said he got too close to the plane. So
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, every law enforcement agency at the airport went and, pushed him off the
Oh,
side of the road, whatever, and they
oh,
went back and reviewed the footage, and he did not. He did everything that he was supposed to do. He stayed
okay.
exactly where he was, stopped where he was supposed to, never got close to the plane, you know what I mean? So, like, nothing came of it, but, yeah, that's a terrifying phone call to get, you know what I mean? And
Oh,
and you nailed it. The bigger things like this, the more liability you take on, because if you
sure.
screw something up, you know, um,
And
look,
the
nobody
time
wants to make
Yeah, I'm
go ahead.
thinking of the time it takes to even learn something like that, because obviously to learn something like that, you have to do it over and over and over again and to get
Yep,
good at it. So it's just amazing to me that have you done like to for a company to, oh yeah, we've done multiple planes before. I don't
yep.
know, it's just kind of amazing to me. It's really niche. It's really neat.
It is, it's fun, and I think that like I said, we enjoy puzzles, so
Yeah.
the harder it is and don't get me wrong, like, I I loved doing work at residential too, you know what I mean? But for me, the commercial side of the business just
Mhm.
presents more of those, "Well, that was wild."
Yeah.
I've gotten to see more things on the commercial side of the business than I ever thought that I would get to see. Like, you walk into places, like, with a bump cap and a B&G, you know what I mean? No one
Yeah.
wants to know why you're there, so they pretty much let you go wherever you wanna go, but I've gotten to see some really cool behind the scenes stuffs over the time in my career because of that.
Wow. I think for me too, as a technical person, if something came to me where I was like, "Oh, this puzzle's a good one. Yeah, I
Yeah,
wanna sink my teeth into this one," and realizing if it's too much because I realize my technicians are not trained in whatever
yep,
they might be up against, and I would hate to put them in that way. Um, I had to realize, and there's a specific, account in my head where if I'm gonna go into this account, I should not be and cannot be the only person solving this issue.
yeah.
Because even if I do train a technician, that's one tech, and then, and hopefully it doesn't happen again. So, have you ever gotten into a spot where even in the size of Rentable Terminix where you went, "Guys, this might be above our heads," or "This is not we shouldn't take this account." So, how to say no to an account, especially when it comes to, like, rodents, wildlife?
Yeah, I think you know what we're lucky in that we partner with some other organizations as well. So if
Yeah,
we run into something weird,
yeah,
um, we can reach out and say, "Hey, like we have." So like my struggle, my blind spot is fumigation work.
uh-huh,
Um, I can fume like a silo and I'm fine with that, but when it comes to like large structural
yeah,
fumigations and stuff like that, that's so outside my window. But we have a whole team that just does that. They're based in Indiana.
yeah,
Well,
that's
we
so
have
cool.
multiple, but they're there. So
Yeah,
when we do run into something individually that I say, dude, that's so far beyond me. I got a call one day about doing some powder post beetle work at this historic building in Pittsburgh. Not it. You know what I mean? Like I can't.
yeah.
But I like I said, I can pick up the phone and I can say, hey, do you know what I mean? What do you guys think about this? And she's like, hey, I can be there on Thursday to go take a look at it.
And it
So
would be so cool to see it, to be like,
yeah.
"Alright, I'll get a flight for Thursday." But
Yeah.
obviously, you guys are all over the place.
Yeah, and that's like I said, that's the benefit of, being as large as we are, but I think that, like, here's my plug for, like, the local state pest management associations, is that, I know that we're all competing against each other in one way, shape, or form or another, but also, like, those things can be super collaborative. Like, think about the folks and who we represent in the group that we're in. At no point in time has anybody ever asked a question, and I've had someone, obviously outside of like proprietary, company information,
Sure.
not willing to like chat about treatment strategies or material selections, stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like it's such a collaborative group, but I think that you see that a lot with the state associations as well. So if you work for a smaller company, go to the state association meetings, make
Yeah,
friends with folks who've been in the industry. I'll tell you the other one that I think is underutilized is the manufacturer representatives. Because
yeah.
if you don't know, then pick up the phone, you know, call Tommy from MGK and be like, hey, or call Patrick or, call Desiree, from BASF and just say,
Mhm.
hey, what do you think about this? and they know their stuff, you
Yes.
know, and they're a resource as well. So even if you yourself don't have it internally, there are so many resources available outside of it. It's just a function of you reaching out and doing it, you know?
So true.
Um, but on the other hand, like there's been other companies that work, like smaller companies around here, that have reached out to us and said, "Hey, this is outside of my wheelhouse. Do you know what I mean? Are you guys interested in, you know, taking this on?" So, yeah, I mean, you have to understand your limitations as well. You know, if you can't hack it, look, let's go back to the airline thing,
Yeah.
right? You have to have somebody that's available to work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and be at an airport within 2 hours of a phone call,
Yes.
right? So if you can't do that, like if you can't commit to that, then it's not a good customer for you
Well, and the business
because
aspect, can we make
yeah,
money off of this? Is
yeah,
this
yeah,
a loss? So
because
that's
no
the
one ever
side of
wants to
things
phone.
that I think Nancy was getting at that I find so fascinating because as a technical person, yeah, we've gotten to the point where we know so much about the pests themselves,
Yep,
but that business aspect of like the gains, the losses, what
yeah.
should we take on? Risks do we need to take? We need to get that certification, pull you
Yeah.
away from, your desk to do that. And from the
So what do you
tech
think about the
perspective too, it's
oh,
just so cool. Like keeping them productive and not
yep.
just on a wild goose chase.
And I think it's fun for them too sometimes, to go see
Oh
something
yeah.
different. I
I
I
know.
would say that the majority of our technicians that do some, like, wild stuff, and I say wild, but just, like, out of the ordinary, they're very prideful of the fact that that's their account. You know?
Yes. I
They
see them
you
a lot.
go to see them and they're like, "Oh, let me show you this, let me show you this, this is so cool," you know? They're very prideful of taking care of it. We
Well,
do
and those are the
mm,
type of people that do great in pest control. I
yep,
really think, and that's why, again, commercial and residential, they are different because you
yep,
get those people that just get so much energy from the commercial side,
yep,
and you get people that get their energy from the residential and getting to know the homeowners and in that sort
yep.
of environment too. So I think
Yeah, I've
eventually
never like, we have resi techs that, like, have been invited to, like, families' weddings and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because
that is
they've been
awesome.
part of that for so long, you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, my wife and I have actually gotten invited to 2 weddings over the years from commercial customers that were just, you see them so often, and I think that,
That's
like,
so
that's part of the fun of it is you get to be a part of these people's lives because that's what you're doing. You're protecting them. You're protecting their business, you're enhancing their lives at home. It's what we do, you know? I joke around that I've never saved anybody's life doing this job, but I promise you collectively, we as an industry make people's lives better every single day. When you can go outside and sit in your patio in the summertime and not get eaten alive, when you have bed bugs and we can come in and we can fix those issues and let you sleep at home,
yeah.
you know what I mean, comfortably again, it's making somebody's life better.
Oh, yeah, I mean, looking into the hantavirus thing,
Yep,
it's, like, contracted through droppings, urine, and just if you sweep the floor of a cabin before people walk in, breathing all
yep,
that in. I was reading about Gene Hackman, who died
yep,
several years ago, and his wife, their house didn't seem to have any rodent issues, but the other,
yep,
structures on the property did, and so
yep,
it's just awful. But that's us, Your company may do exclusion work, but maybe you want to get into the sanitation side of it. You know, as much as I wanted my techs to help homeowners clean up rodent droppings so that we get rid of those pheromone scents, they had to be careful about wearing their respirator,
yep,
wearing that PPE because God forbid, I don't want you breathing in that stuff to help a customer and then go to another account and then suddenly you're not feeling great. As
yep.
rare as it is, it can happen.
And I think that it's, when you're getting into those things, we've done a lot of bird and rodent cleanups over the years, and there are ways to kind of limit your potential exposure. You mentioned it, wearing some kind of respiratory protection, wetting those droppings down
Yep.
before you actually go in and start cleaning up, whether it's with like a disinfectant product or just something to stop it from, because that's what it is, right? It's got to be airborne. You have to inhale it for it to come in from the rodent and from, the urine. I'm super interested, and I mean this in, like, in the least morbid sense possible, but looking at the current hantavirus situation, and you hear a bunch of different things, but from what I've heard, the cruise ship seems to have no rodent issues whatsoever. They didn't find any droppings, they didn't, you know what I mean? Nothing along those lines, so now it sounds like maybe they picked it up when they were ashore somewhere and then brought it back on the ship that way. I think that, for the folks that are worried, this particular strain of hantavirus that transfers from person to person, you have to be in close contact for an extended period of time.
You
You know what I
do.
mean?
And we
Yeah,
hope that
right?
our cruise lines and places like that, if you're spending good money, that they are cleaned and you know what I mean? Just like a hotel room, but especially a cruise ship where you are going to be confined on there for, in this
Yeah,
case, if you're spending the entire time, yeah, about a month, 33 days. So, yeah, they say that right now, they think that they contracted it while they were touring Argentina and Chile for a few months prior to getting
okay.
on the cruise because of it does take about a week to 8 weeks to incubate and really show symptoms for the first time, so doesn't take away the importance of us and pest control and
Yeah.
sanitation in these places, especially, like I said, with those confined areas. But we
Yeah.
know that our pest control
People are always
technicians.
the variable.
Yeah, and we're always working in confined spaces, you
Yeah,
know? As a technician, you're in attics, you're in crawl spaces, and so it's just really important for us to it's good to have these things in the news once in a while, not to fear monger because in this particular one is rare. But
yeah,
I mean, salmonella is everywhere, bacteria is
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah.
Sanitation goes a long way.
It does, and it doesn't have to be rodents.
No,
Flies, German cockroaches, right?
absolutely.
These pests aren't hanging out in clean spaces. You know what I mean? They're breeding in some pretty gross stuff,
Yep.
and you certainly wouldn't, I don't know, like, run outside to your garbage can in the middle of August, take some of that juice that's down there and wipe it on your countertop. But
Sure.
yet, when you've got bottle flies or, you know what I mean, even house flies, in your house and they're landing on surfaces, guess where they came from? They came from that soup that was outside. So there's a million different ways you can get disease transmission, through pests. And like I said, it goes back to the whole, enhancing life things, is that's what we do. Is that not only are we addressing the pest, but ideally, you know, as a technician, you're addressing the underlying issue with your customer. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, this is why you have flies and this is how you could help to mitigate it, for
Mhm.
your commercial customers. This is look, no pest has ever like Harry Potter style like apparated into the middle of a facility, right? There's always a why that they're in there.
I love
And
that word, by the way.
what was it?
I love that you know that word, by the way. I'll just
Um,
operate. Thank you.
my wife's a big Harry Potter person. Took her to Universal Studios a couple years ago. You thought she was like a kid at Disney World. It was hilarious.
I still haven't been. I need to
You still haven't
go.
been? Oh, come on. Well, you
No,
know what? When the little one gets a little older and you make the trip down there, do you know what I mean? Like, it's a rite of passage as a parent, you gotta
absolutely,
take your kid down at some point in time.
absolutely.
Um, but, we're kinda going full circle a little bit here, but, we were talking about control methods in these challenging environments, but really the solution is to find out the why. How did they get in there in the first place? Why are they thriving in this space? If
And you
we can
might need to
identify.
look at their practices and how
Yeah.
things come in and the whole, like you
Yep.
said, manufacturing side of it, and
Yeah. So it's if you can find the why, right, you have a better job of like, you're not gonna keep every pest out of every environment, but we can do a better job of making sure we get control quicker,
so
if we
let's
address
talk
those.
about some specific examples if you can, because you have
Yep.
had experience in these, so in airlines and obviously restaurants and healthcare environments. So, what are some ways that so you've mentioned fumigation, you've had to kind of deal with that. Birth control methods,
Yep.
have you tried those out?
Yeah, 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 we use those, and I think that, um, I always say that there's not a product out there that is a standalone product, right?
Right.
Like, we have access to so many things that work in conjunction with each other. So, for the birth control product. It's not the only thing that we use, but it's kind of a piece of the puzzle. It's one of the tools in the toolbox that we incorporate in certain areas. And I think that, I'll use the zoo for, specifically, but it's a function of, and I have one in particular that I'm thinking of. It's a function of like going out there originally and looking at it and saying, okay, so we can do this here, but we can't do this here. So it's kind of breaking these down into these areas where you have different control strategies dependent on the
Mm,
environment. You
mm.
know, um, think about like you get some of these that have these huge aquarium, facilities in them. What does almost every single one of our pesticides say on the label,
Oh
right?
yeah,
This
yeah,
is toxic
deadly to
fish.
harmful to aquatic, yeah, organisms.
Yeah. exactly, right? So then you're like, "Okay, cool." So then you go back to a lot of environmental changes, a lot of vacuuming, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
people overlook, you know, just, like, the quickest way to reduce a pest population, just physically remove it from that space. So,
Yeah.
remove it, figure out why it's there, solve that underlying problem, and then go on from there. Just because we're not applying some sort of pesticide or rodenticide doesn't mean we're not doing pest control.
Right.
We don't have to come out every single time and hose the place down to go, "Oh, I'm doing good pest control." Um, so as we go in and we look at these facilities and we start to look at things, and that's where we can. So in places where we can't use rodenticides, or you get into some of these places where you have these you know, small little monkeys that if you put anything in that environment, their first inclination is to pick it up and mess with it.
Mhm.
So how do I put something in a space where that little dude can't get his fingers into it and get caught in this natural? So that's what we're talking about, like building, there were times we've had to build stuff where, you basically have a tunnel that we would put baffles in. So, and then it would be the trap, snap trap would be in the middle of that, a baited snap trap, where a rodent's going to work his way through, go around the baffles that we built to get to the trap to find that food source. But that bird, obviously the opening's too small for a bird to get inside there, or it's those baffles prevent, our little monkey friends from reaching inside and getting their hand caught inside there. So it's a lot of, you know, like I said, okay, here's our challenge. Our challenge is this, and how do we overcome
Mhm.
um that challenge? So, and I think, like I said, it's using all of the tools available to you, and not just the ones that you get from like Target or Viserys or whatever. Sometimes you got to go to Home Depot, you got to go to Lowe's,
Yeah.
and you got to kind of make it yourself. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and going back to training your people, giving them the confidence, whether it's the technician or the salesperson at first at the account, putting eyes on the account, even somebody on the phone, customer care saying, "This sounds like it might be a bigger job. Maybe we should get in some reinforcement and
yep,
send a technical person or a manager out there to go with that another person to see, what are we getting into? Do we say yes to this? And if
yep.
so, what tools are we gonna need?"
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we are all a for-profit business,
Right.
right? Like, so if you take on a job and you end up losing a bunch of money on it, that's not good for the bit, like you said, that's not good for the
It's a
business
good
piece of
learning
it. So
experience, but right.
yeah, great learning experience, but, if it's outside of your capabilities, it's okay to say no. You don't have to take on every single customer. Like I said, we talked before about relying on the experts, but yeah, we've absolutely had customers who are like, "No, we can't win here," I guess basically is the way that I look at it, and a lot of times that win is like, "I don't think I can solve your pest problem here." You run into some of these, like, hoarding environments, um,
And that was the
or
one
you
that came to my mind where I had to walk away ultimately.
yeah,
Me
you
being
know
the person that says, "I just wanna solve everything." If there's a will, there's a way, and by God, I will find it, but then
Yep.
going, "You know what? I have to just say,
Yeah,
not this time."
we
Yeah.
can't,
It can be really
and
hard,
it can, because like you said, at the end of the day, you're like, "I wanna fix this,"
especially if you
but
get to know these people,
yep,
but you really have to have that business sense and just know when to walk away.
when you have these environments where, like, it's so full that I literally can't put any control devices out,
Yeah.
you're not gonna be
Yeah, there's one.
successful in that
Mhm.
case. I think, bed bugs and rodents are the 2 that come to my mind in those situations, is that, like, I can't. There's nothing that I can do that's gonna solve this problem. Could I maybe harvest 70 mice from here? Yes, but we're not solving the problem? So yeah, it's okay sometimes to say no. Um,
Well, especially if the customer's not you're not receiving it on their end too. You can wanna help, to the ends of the earth, but if the customer it gets to the point where you say, "I need this from you. I need you to do XYZ,"
yeah,
and they're not willing to do that, then that's a simple answer for you. But
yep,
I do think it's cool on the airline where you said, "I think we might need you to go to 30,000 feet," or whatever it was, and depressurize the cabin. Like,
yeah.
that's what they had to do to
You
keep
have
going.
to, you know what I mean? And it's funny because a lot of those airplanes, depending on the country that you're doing the work in, like, regulations are different. So here in the
Yes,
United
that's another
States,
big one.
we're super restrictive as to what we can make application-wise into the cabin of an airplane. It's a little more flexibility into the cargo space, but in the cabin of the airplanes, we're it's pretty restrictive what we can apply. Um, I have also gotten planes that have been treated in other countries, and I'm like, "Hey, can you send me the service report for what was applied there?" And it basically looked like somebody went in with a backpack of deltamethrin and, like, hosed the plane down because they can do that there, right?
Sure.
So I think it's one of the other challenges we have here is that we're a little more restrictive as to what we can and cannot apply. Um, so it forces you to kind of think outside the box and come up with different trapping strategies. How can I make this most effective in a very short period of time? So, most of the time the way we overcome that shorter period of time and what we can use is through volume. You put so much out that it's really almost unavoidable for that rodent to get caught as long as they come out of. But then it's also a function of understanding like the if you've never had the pleasure of seeing an airplane without its shell, so, like, when you go inside where the seats are and you've got that plastic shell,
Yeah.
um, there is thousands and thousands of miles of wiring inside there. There's also
Yeah.
a huge headspace above, like, where the plastic part of the plane comes in the actual outside of the plane. There's a large gap, and then there is along both sides, and then there's openings that go from that cabin area down into the cargo space, goes down into, like, the electrical compartment as well. So there are a bunch of places that there's the ENE will go up into the cockpit area. So it's a function of just getting a ton of devices out in all of those areas
Oh,
to try to get
man.
control. Yeah, yeah. But
Is
like I
that
said,
something that they've had to do anytime you have a rodent issue in a plane is they can kinda deconstruct it like that, or
it
that's
depends.
yeah.
So if you're lucky,
You say it's a
most
mess?
I'm sorry?
Did you say it's a mess or it's a mix?
No, no, no. I said it depends.
Oh, it depends.
So if you're lucky, um, we so all of your airplanes over the course of time get completely torn apart and rebuilt from ground up. So they have to do that for safety reasons. The FAA requires that over a certain cadence, whatever. So
Yeah,
sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll catch one that's going to be sitting for a couple days for some kind of repair or rework,
okay.
and then you can get in there and you have a little more time. It doesn't happen all of the time, but you know I think it's a lot of times working with your customer and saying, "Hey, if we can't achieve this in this period of time, this is what we need in order to be successful with that." I think that all goes back to the beginning in these challenging we're talking about selling the account at the beginning, these challenging environments and setting expectations with those customers and say, "Look, here's the reality of the situation. This is what you have handed us. This is what we can accomplish. If we can't do it in that period of time, this is what we need from you in order to be successful."
Right.
Um, I think it's always better to have those conversations up front
Yes.
versus once you get into it and you're like, "Ah, well, now I need you to, park this plane for 48 hours and, remove this access panel that's in the back so I can get devices inside there," which involves maintenance and, a bunch of other stuff
Sure.
and coordinating a place to put that plane. So I think it's if you have those protocols set up at the beginning, and we sit down with the zoos, we sit down with the airlines, and we write these protocols that they're sort of like if then statements for all of this stuff. If this happens, this is what we do. If this happens, this is what we do.
Sure.
So it's already an established protocol. It's not a surprise. We already know this is what has to happen. Um, because like I said, with a lot of those things, you can't have an airplane sit for 5 days not getting used. There's no place to move a gorilla most of the time
Yeah.
at a zoo. They don't have like, "Oh, yeah, we got, like, a backup place to
Put him
put,"
in his other room that he's got.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, it's just not a thing, what I mean? There are not, like, backup enclosures for all
Mhm.
of those animals. Not every zoo building has a backup enclosure area even in that building.
Sure.
So, you oftentimes don't have, the ability to just like I said, you have to come up with these protocols at the beginning and kinda work through them.
And I think even outside of, just zoos and airplanes, that goes for any account, for your technicians and just leadership in general, everybody to know what's the backup plan? What do we say
Yeah,
yes to? What are we saying no to set those expectations as a company up front so everyone's kind of on the same page. So if, somebody does walk into account they go they can have those kind of, reasoning right up front so that
yeah,
because a lot of times what happens is there's a manager who's reviewing, doing a bit of QA stuff, and they're looking at service reports going, "Wait a minute, Why haven't we solved this yet? Why are we doing it this way? And then you've got to kind of backtrack. And that, that can get messy and it's part of our job. But if we can set those expectations up front and do those trainings on the front end, then gosh, that's great. That saves a lot of time and effort and money.
One of the coolest things I learned doing the healthcare stuff is the hospitals use these things. They're called infection control risk assessments. So
Mhm.
basically, they look at an area of the hospital, and if this really bad thing happens here, how bad is it overall? Right. So I've kind of taken that into like my general life when we approach any kind of customer. It's like, okay, if I'm working in this space and I apply an aerosol, how bad is that? Right.
Mhm.
If I'm working in this space and I apply a rodenticide, how bad is that? And ideally, what I'm looking for, and I kind of color code them. So we come up with these boxes, and I'll list out the application methods, I'll list out the area of that account, and then I color code them green, yellow, and red.
Neat.
For our team to use anything that's in the red, somebody has to approve that before that happens, and there are safeguards built around that stuff. You're always good in the green. So if I look at a zoo and I'm working in, like, the main office building and I want to apply some cockroach gel bait, that's a green. No concerns with that whatsoever. If for whatever reason, I'm working in a hospital and I'm in a, you know, positive pressure environment and I want to use an aerosol in there where then the air from that room is, pushing out into the hallway, that's a red because now I've got the potential of that aerosol. Obviously, if I'm in a positive pressure environment in a hospital, somebody's really, really sick in that space anyways.
Mhm.
Um, so now I've got the potential of that aerosol, ending up someplace I don't want it. So I personally have kind of taken that approach with a lot of our stuff is like, okay, what is the risk of me using this material in this space? And you kind of come up with these grids. And it's nice because then the technician can look at it and go, no, I'm good to do that here, regardless of what the label says. And the label is the law. But to me, the label is like the minimum standard of that. Oftentimes I'll go, okay, the label says I can use this in here, but should I use this in here in this specific instance? So
What I love about this conversation is it just reminds me that as a manager, for people that aren't in the field all the time, and you're not in the field all the time anymore, you don't wanna be putting out fires. That's not your job. So for
yeah,
those companies where their leadership feels like they are putting out fires all the time, it doesn't give them any opportunity to sit down and think about the bigger picture and really think, just take a moment and say, what do my people need? And do I have the time and capacity to sit down and make a chart like that? What do they
yeah,
really need? How can I make sure that everybody in the company doesn't have to think about it? They just know they can
yeah.
make a decision faster because isn't that what we do besides removing hurdles is we don't want you guys to think hard and agonize over every single little decision. We want you
Yeah.
to be trained so that you show up at the account, you go, okay, boom, boom, boom. Oh, I see that that's an issue right there. And oh, over here, I can do this for you. Here's what I can't do, but and know who to reach out to. That's really what we do on a day-to-day basis. That's what we should have the capacity of doing, right?
And now I mean, with these things, it's so easy to build that and make that accessible to your
Yeah.
whole team. If we use Google as a company, so I mean to have a Google Drive with, all of that stuff available to them so they have questions. I think that's the thing. If you can just teach them where to go to find the answers, that's half the
Yeah.
battle right there. You
Mhm.
know, the amount of phone calls as an operations manager you can cut down on if your technician just knows where to go to find the information versus it's easy. It's easy for me to call Jen and be like, "Hey Jen, how do I do this?" And then you answer it. But now I've got 17 technicians that I oversee, and I've got 17 of those folks that are calling me for that stuff. So if the moral of the story, I think, of this whole conversation is build it up front. Whatever it is, whether it's, how you're going to service this account, how you're going to set up information access to your team, build that stuff up front so you can be successful. And to your point, you're not spending a ton of time putting out fires if it's already built. Is the lift heavy at the beginning? Absolutely. But you're going to do the work either way. You're better off doing it up front, than that's kind of the conversation we have with the technicians too, when they have a pest problem. You're gonna spend the time there that it takes to fix the problem. You're better off fixing it up front, spending the time up front versus kinda kicking the can down the road, and then, extending that time frame.
Totally. Yeah, I always see those surveys that come out about, in the workplace, there's always about, 20 to 30% of the people are, or maybe it's even less, are actively engaged. And then you
Yeah.
see the ones that are, the ones that are just kind of ho hum. And then you get the whatever 10% that are actively disengaged. But
Yeah.
as a company, if you're able to say, everyone knows what to do, you get the best people, the ones that get energy from that type of work. And you have an active way for them to move up if they so wish to do so.
Mhm.
And then, like, how great is it to actually have an organization where, yeah, you know exactly who to call. And just that engagement is so much bigger because you've put that in place. You've put in the work. Provided the time for your leadership team to think about ways to make it a good place to work. That's great. And when it comes to rodent control, yeah, we all have to reach out for help. Sometimes
Absolutely.
it's just how it goes.
Right? I mean, look, you know, there's not one of us that works in this industry that hasn't run into one rodent issue where you're like, "Dude, I just can't." You know what I mean? Like, I cannot figure this out. Like, why can I not
Throw
catch this
me
roofer?
a rope. I
Right?
am drowning
You know
over
what I
here.
mean? And then you call somebody and they're like, "Well, did you try this?" And you're like, "Well, no, I didn't try that. Let me try that," you know?
Yeah,
Um, I didn't really know anything up until a couple years ago about, like, seasoning rodent devices, and by seasoning, I mean, like, I we have a guy that, like, he will take his wooden snap traps and put them in a Ziploc bag with dog food in them and
uh-huh,
let them, like, sit for a couple days, so when you take it out, that whole trap now smells like dog food. So when you run into these commercial accounts where the rodents are feeding on on dog food, then now all of a sudden that device doesn't smell like wooden plastic anymore. It smells like
delicious.
yeah, exactly, right? I
Oh,
didn't know anything about that,
that's
and,
amazing.
I was struggling one day and I called him and I was like, "Emery," and he's like, "Well, have you tried this?" "No, I didn't try
Of
that." You
course
know
I
what I
didn't
mean?
try
So,
that. Thank
let's
you.
try that,
Yeah.
right? Exactly, let's try that now.
I remember
So
these rats in a, department store that were going after the Reese's peanut butter cups and Snickers bars in the back. I didn't think to season the traps with Snickers bars. I
right?
did
I
them right
started
there.
using, Slim Jims, so I'll take the
Mhm.
Slim Jims and, because 'cause they're nice and oily, and I'll rub the oils of the Slim Jim all over the trigger and then all over the wood snap trap itself, and then, use that as a lure on some of them along with some different stuff. Um, but yeah, now you've taken that whole thing and you've made it smell delicious. Plus, half the Slim Jim for the rodent, the other half for Mike. It's a
That's
win-win, right?
great. This has been really fun. I can't believe it's already been an hour.
That's crazy. That went by fast.
Yeah, really fast. Go us.
Killing it.